Welcome to All About Capital Campaigns, a podcast that provides fuel for your nonprofit's growth. Each week, hosts Andrea Kilstedt and Amy Eisenstein, co-founders of the Capital Campaign Toolkit, provide practical tips about raising more money for your nonprofit organization. The Capital Campaign Toolkit is a support system for nonprofit leaders who are running capital campaigns. At capitalcampaigntoolkit.com, you can download a step-by-step guide for your capital campaign and get many other free resources. This podcast is recorded on a live webinar every Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. You can join the live session and get your questions answered by signing up today at toolkittalks.com.
We have been thinking about board training. And I actually took a nap a little earlier today. And not really a nap, but I just lay down to sort of let myself reflect a little. And I was thinking about board training. And here's the deal. First of all, I want to know how many of you or who on the call has actually served on a board or are currently serving on a board. Sort of key in if you're on a board, if you have that experience of not only being a development director, but actually being on a board. Right, a lot of you. I don't know.
And maybe you're here in your board capacity.
Maybe.
We might have some board members. So if you're an executive director or a development director, let us know. Great.
Lots of people have served on boards. Amy, you've served on boards, right?
Of course.
I've served on boards, right?
Yes.
So for those of you who have not yet served on boards, let me tell you that it's a really good idea to serve on a board. And even if it's just the board of a little organization, it's a really good idea because there is nothing like being a board member to make you understand what that feels like. Right. And to understand the challenges of serving on a board I personally find serving on a board challenging. It doesn't suit my temperament well. So I take my hat off to people who are really good board members. Now, here's why I'm starting out by asking you that. My experience is that when you serve on a board, you are in a position where you sort of have stepped into a seat of being an expert or a leader or someone who has something to contribute as the governing body of the organization. And you are not serving on a board as a student, right? You're serving on a board because people look to you as for the credibility you bring to the organization. And when we think about board training, we need to take that into consideration because, in fact, from the mindset of being a board member, it's a little hard to put yourself in the position of being a willing student. In fact, there are a fair number of crotchety old board members, and I count myself among them, who, while I love to learn in other contexts, I'm not so sure that I love to learn as a board member. It's like, I'd sit myself back and sort of say, all right, teach me, right? That's not good. Now, if you're doing board training, you have to take that mindset into consideration, right? It's not like you're going into a classroom full of people who have signed up to learn, though all of you in your other worlds are going to be learners, I'm sure. But somehow as a board member, you have to move yourself over. And when you have experts coming in and saying, well, I'm going to train you and teach you to do something, you probably are not the most receptive audience. So think about that as we start talking about board training. And if you're going into a capital campaign, which many of you are either thinking about one or in one or having been through one, you know that many of your board members, in fact, most board members aren't in a position where they know a huge amount about capital campaigns. Board members tend to fall into three categories in my experience with regard to capital campaigns. There are those board members who through the years have actually turned my hair gray, who tend I shouldn't say this, I'm going to whisper it, they tend to be old men who think they know a lot about capital campaigns, right? Because they have twisted people's arms and gone to cocktail parties and twisted their friends' arms. And they think they know what there is to know about capital campaigns. And they are not eager to have some young whippersnapper. Well, I'm not talking about myself, but any of the rest of you who are going in as board trainers, right? If you're like under 50, you're considered a young whippersnapper, right? And that one class of board members are not going to be easy for you to get through their resistance. So that's one class. People who think they know what they're doing, think they know everything there is to know, aren't really interested in knowing more. Then there are people who really have never been in a campaign. They find themselves on a board of an organization going into a campaign, and in fact, they're nervous. They're scared, and they're actually hungry for information because they know they're going to be in trouble if they don't get it. Right?
That's probably the majority, wouldn't you say?
Maybe.
I don't know.
Maybe. I'm not sure of that, but I think it's often an even split, actually. I mean,
all right. Is there a third? Were you going to give us a third category?
Yes. And the third category are people who sit somewhere in the middle, that they know they should want to know more. They know there is more to know, but they have been involved in a campaign or two, and they think they have a pretty good idea what's going on, right? Those are the three categories. Now, if we or you go in there to train them, they hear a couple of things you need to know. And then, Amy, I am going to pass it to you. I know I'm going on here. So what you need to know is this, that with any adults, particularly the recalcitrant ones, the task of being a trainer is not to tell them or give them information. The task of being a trainer is to pull out of them the information that you want them to learn, so that they think they are telling you that information, and that it's not that you are telling them that information. Now, in order to do that requires some serious thought about how to design the training. Right? Amy, I'll stop talking. That's my thing about positioning board trainings. It's not so easy.
I will throw out that on many boards, not all of them, there is one person who probably has been through several campaigns and is actually going to be a huge support and ally. So they're not the crotchety old men, in your words, Andrea, but they actually do know what they're doing. They've been through successful campaigns. They're happy to help ask. They're great solicitors. So anyways, that's exciting when you have one of those on your board as well. I hope this makes Andrea's point in terms of, people don't like to be trained. I think we have to come up with a better word. If you guys know a better word in the chat, I'd love to know a better word for training. But, one of the things that I think about is that I would never, ever, and I see this all the time, put icebreakers on a board retreat agenda. Right? I would never put icebreaker because nobody wants to be involved in an icebreaker. I just call it welcome and introductions. And then I do an icebreaker and I have people say something about themselves or get to know each other. But that's just sort of one little example of, that people don't want to be, they don't want to participate in some of these exercises. But if you bring it in a different way. So we're getting lots of words in the chat. I like them: guidance, empowerment, onboarding, coaching, right?
How about exploring?
Yeah. Facilitation. Yeah. So anyways, lots of good ways, but, I think Andrea is absolutely right in terms of how do you get them to share what they already know or draw out the points that you're trying to make. I mean, there is literature and research on adult learning. And if you say something as a trainer, people absorb about 20% of it. But if they say it, they'll remember 80% of the time what they said. So if you can get people participating and get them talking, they're much more likely to retain the information than if you just tell something. So, a good training should not be a lecture. It should not be a monologue. I always tell people, we're here to have a dialogue, right? We're here to have a conversation. We're here for you to participate. I'm never going to be the one doing most of the speaking. And I tell adults, adult learners right off the bat, if you participate, you're going to get more out of it. You're much more likely to comprehend the information if you participate and provide examples and share stories than if I just say things. Okay. Andrea, anything else to add?
Yeah, I do. I actually could. I won't do it, but I could talk about this for a full hour without stopping. I have a lot of thoughts about it. But here's my big thought. What I have learned about training is that if you are going to do a training, that it is way less important that that you spend time organizing the material or how you're going to present the material that you want people to learn. And way more important that you spend time designing the opportunities for people to participate. Those are two very different things. One is, all right, I'm going to tell you everything I know about capital campaigns. Or I'm going to tell you 5 things about capital campaigns that I want you to learn. That is preparing content. On the other hand, if I take those 5 things about capital campaigns that I want you to learn, and I design an exercise around each of them so that you spend some time exploring either with your own thinking or with other people, those questions that will lead you to the answer, that's design. Right? Then you have designed the training by designing the participatory exercise that leads to the content that you want people to come up with. And that's a huge difference. To me, when I first learned that, it was like somebody had taken my brain and sort of turned it around, 180 degrees, because I all of a sudden realized what I had been doing wrong. When I had to do a training, years ago, I would sit down and I would actually write an outline of everything that I wanted to tell people, that I wanted people to learn. And I needed to do it the other way around. So, Amy, you're muted. Do you know that? Are you talking to your kids?
I
got you.
How did you know I was yelling at my kids? I was. I'm sorry. Oh, my God. 45 things going on in the background at my house. So I was muted on purpose. All right. Excellent. Sorry. Are we going to questions, or I don't want to interrupt your last thought?
Well, let's give an example of that. So, for example, if you're going to do a training, let's say a campaign training, one of the things that we tend to do and want people to come out of a campaign training with is a certain comfort in making the case. That's what we think about, right? So you can either outline here's the outline of a case. Here are all the things that need to be in a case. Or you can put people in groups of 3 and you can say, all right, each one of you has 90 seconds in order to talk through how you would make the case. And you're going to go around all 3 of you. And then you're going to say, well, of the 3 90-second presentations we made, what were the key elements that were in the most effective case? And then you're going to get those groups to present it back to the whole group. And guess what they're going to give you? They're going to give you the outline of the case that you would have taught them if you had just been teaching, right? So that's a way of turning it to the other way around, where you give people exercises that are going to lead them to come up with the content. I actually think that's a pretty good example. Don't you, Amy?
I do. Excellent. All right. Yes, it does take longer and it takes more thought, but they get so much more out of it that it's absolutely worth it. I mean, who wants to do a training that only takes 45 minutes, but, they walk away and they forget 80% of what you said. And so it's important to be thoughtful about this.
Somebody once said to me, Amy, The less you talk, the smarter people think you are.
Oh, absolutely. I think that, I mean, we know that as fundraisers, we want to listen, right?
No,
we
that
listen our way to a gift.
Amy.
What's that?
We're pretty dumb.
Yeah. We talk too much. All right, let's go to questions. All right. Pamela is asking us for important elements when developing a fund development plan. Specifically, she's asking about a symphony and chorus. Organization is new to fund development. So, Pamela, that's a big question. I would we have such smart people on the line with us. I would love to hear from you, from all the people in our audience. What elements do you need when developing a fund development plan? I'm going to crowdsource this one, and we're going to go on to another one and come back and circle back and see what we hear. All right. Maria says, I'm in marketing and would like some creative ideas and inspiration for announcing a campaign close. So I guess you're at the end of your campaign. Is that right, Maria? Am I reading that correctly? All right. Andrea, what are some creative ways to I think, celebrate, right? I mean, if we're closing a campaign, we're announcing a campaign close, so we're doing a little celebrating.
These days, I think you have to think about that. Working in a university makes it more complicated, right? You are undoubtedly dealing with alumni groups. And so you have to think, when you think about celebration, you have to break down what the options are, right? I mean, who should be celebrating with whom, for starters. You should get people celebrating with people that they have some overlap with, that they're likely to know, or they have some cross-fertilization with. You want to think about celebrating in person and virtually, and in terms of broader public celebrations these days. You want to think about celebrating as a way of boosting the visibility of your institution. So once you stop thinking about the groups of people and how you will celebrate that way, you're going to want to think about celebrations more broadly. So the question of celebration is almost like the question of campaign communications, where you look at different ways of celebrating, different messages, different groups, right? It's a complex process to figure that out. But what are creative ways to celebrate?
Good. I think that's a good start, and we're going to get more from people in the chat. So, okay. All right. So let's read Joel's question here. How to find fundraising specialist board members. Oh, fundraising specialist board members, huh? And work in fundraising into business planning and strategic planning. Also, how to start a capital campaign. Oh my goodness.
That's
without
5 questions.
What's that? Without any funds or salary or overhead costs. Okay. Why does it have to be without any salary or overhead costs? Right? I mean, it takes money to make money, right? I know that's so cliche, but why do, I know the answer to this, the media and all the negative publicity that we get as nonprofits, but I want to just say, Joel, I don't believe at all in the idea that there should be no overhead costs or salary or funding or investment. I think that's nonsense. I don't know what kind of pressure you're under from your board or from the executive director or what your role is, but I truly believe that if you want to be able to manage and steward your donors' funds well, you should have the best people doing that. And in order to have the best people managing your funds and running your programs, you need to pay them. They're in this because their heart's in it, but they also need to make a living. So I'm gonna say that. So Sure. You want to find people who are great at being board members and people who work in fundraising. I guess those are two very different questions. Anyways, all right. Andrea, let me stop rambling for a minute. I don't know if you want to add anything. Or
I mean, Joel's in a startup, a new nonprofit, and here's the advice. I think, Joel, anytime you're starting something up, you have to start fundraising close at hand from the people you already know. Right. You can't just go out to the world. You can't go out to big foundations because you have no track record. You have no history. You have no credit. You have limited credibility, even if you yourself have a lot of credibility. The organization has no legs to stand on yet. So you have to begin by making a list of the people you know and the organizations you know who have some reason to want to invest in your success. And start there. Right? Get them to do some initial funding, break it down into smaller steps, and then grow from there. You can't go from 0 to 60 or 0 to 120 overnight when you're starting a nonprofit organization. It just doesn't work that way. Fundraising is based on building trust and credibility, and that simply takes time. So be patient, start small, start with the people who care most about what you do, ask them for some initial funding, and grow from there. That's my advice. Let's go to the anonymous, our famous anonymous attendee that we never know if we have many of them or only one of them. But I will be facilitating a conversation with board that I consult with on engaging the board in fundraising in general. What ideas, what things would you touch on? Well, I think that's a really interesting question for this particular topic. Amy, why don't you and I pass it back and forth a couple times? What would you touch on, Amy?
Yeah. So, I like to assume that the board doesn't know anything about fundraising, right? And that, even people who are expert fundraisers or have lots of experience, they're happy to have the reminders if you're not talking, down to them or in some sort of condescending way, like they're, right? You're speaking to them as adults, but you're explaining the basics. I break fundraising down into 4 pieces. For step 1, donor identification. Step 2, cultivation or relationship building. Step 3, solicitation, the ask. And step 4, stewardship and follow-up. And I have a graphic of a cycle with these 4 steps, and I actually see light bulbs going off in people's minds when I tell them they don't have to help with every piece of fundraising, but they have to help with some piece. And, you can literally hear a sigh of relief when people who are nervous and anxious and don't want to be involved in asking, I let them off the hook right away. I say, you have to help with fundraising, but you don't have to help with asking, quite frankly, because if you're nervous and bad at it, you're probably going to screw it up. I'd rather you introduce people to the organization. I'd rather you bring people to events or give them tours. I'd rather you help with thanking and follow up than asking. A staff member can do that. A few board members that are good at that can do that. And eventually, I hope you'll come to appreciate the solicitation piece and help with that. But right now, so that's where I start generally when I'm facilitating a conversation. And then I ask them for ideas of how they can help with donor identification, with relationship building or cultivating, with thanking. So that's where it comes in that they generate the ideas. They're more likely to help with ideas that they came up with. If we say, all right, what's the best way you've ever been thanked? Or how would you like to be thanked? Or what are some ways we can thank our donors? And then they come up with the ideas. So, when I'm training them, I'm getting them to generate the ideas and pick the 1 or 2 that they'd like to help with. Andrea, what do you do?
Yeah, so I think I generally work on a cycle of fundraising with them, and in fact you can even ask them, what do you think the important elements in fundraising are? So you can get them to build the cycle. You can make a flip chart list of all the things they think are part of fundraising, and then you can say, here's the way we've shaped that into a cycle. Yeah. Right. So you can always begin by getting them to come up with the concepts. One of the things that I always like to do at board trainings is that I like to find out and let board members find out how to talk about their organization, how to articulate the mission, how to articulate the case. And, they have to find their own language for it. So again, it's not saying, well, here's our mission statement. It's saying, all right, let's put our heads together and figure out what is the most compelling way to talk about this organization. Put them together in small groups, have them work on it, have them post their ideas in the front of the room if you're live, have them vote on have them give little presentations, have them vote on what the most exciting presentation they heard about presenting the organization, right? People like to find their own language, and they will learn from that. One interesting tip I've learned and use often is that I give people a chance to do that not once but twice, because they get better the second time. So you can get them to, if you put them in groups of 3, for example, and you give them each 90 seconds to give their 90-second, little description of the organization, how they would talk to their friends about the organization, then you can they can talk about, well, what worked about which of those. And then you say, well, go back to the talk. Let's do that again. This time, let's make it 60 seconds instead of 90 seconds. So you get them to do the same thing twice. And that's the way they actually learn to polish their language and their words. And they enjoy it. They really do enjoy it.
So, Andrea, all over the chat are some great recommendations and resources for starting development shops. But one theme that's coming up again and again is Asking Matters. And it's interesting, of course, Brian Saber is the head of Asking Matters. But I'm guessing that many people on this chat do not know your start.
I'm the mother of Asking Matters.
Andrea is the mother of Asking Matters.
Grandmother of Asking Matters. So the history of Asking Matters, just because it'll make you laugh, is that I was sitting at my desk years ago and looking over at my husband, who is about as quiet and untalkative as I am loud and talkative. And I thought to myself, I wonder if he could ever be trained to ask for a gift. I wonder if he could ever ask for gifts. And the idea of Asking Matters actually grew out of that thought. The idea of asking styles grew out of that thought. And Brian Saber and I had known one another for years. So it was just a good time in our lives together to come up with it. But anyway, Brian now has taken it over. He's doing a wonderful job with it. It's fun to see it grow. But that was the basis for it.
All right. I love this question from Laura. Laura's asking, what steps would you take with a board following a strategic planning process to lead them into a campaign planning process? Andrea, I think that is a question for you.
Yes, Laura. Hi, nice to have you ask that question, Laura. It makes me want to catch up with you outside of this call and find out how you're doing and what's going on. For the most part, when you finish a strategic planning process, you should have come out with some clear ways forward and objectives, some of which you can put dollar signs next to, and will provide the basis for a fundraising campaign, a comprehensive campaign, a building campaign. It's very common for an organization to come to us saying, well, we need to raise, $8 million to build a building. Well, how do you know you need to build a building? Well, our board has we have just gone through a strategic planning process, and this is in our 5-year or 10-year plan, right? So it's a capital campaign is a natural sort of outgrowth of strategic planning. Now, one of the things about capital campaigns is that when they are designed in what I would say in the most effective way, you will use the process of shaping your campaign, of clarifying the campaign objectives, of coming up with your campaign goal. You will actually involve people who are not on your board in that process. So the strategic planning process probably mostly came out of your board. Now for a campaign, you're going to want to put together small, you're going to want to bring in other people to help you develop your campaign plans. So it's a wonderful opportunity, Laura. If you now have a clear set of campaign objectives, it's a wonderful opportunity for you to move forward in putting together a campaign planning process, perhaps in doing a feasibility study or a guided feasibility study to test your goals, then putting together a campaign plan.
Yeah. So Laura goes on to say they've just completed a feasibility study, but the recommendation was to complete a detailed strategic plan so that they have some specific goals to strive for. Honestly, I'm not sure who you had doing your feasibility study, but you shouldn't have been allowed to do a feasibility study without specific objectives and a case, because that's what you're testing in a feasibility study. So I'm not sure exactly where the breakdown was there, but honestly, if you're ready to think about going into a campaign planning process, that's what we help people with every day, Laura, at the Capital Campaign Toolkit. So I do hope that you'll visit our website, capitalcampaigntoolkit.com, and talk to us about how we can guide you through the process of preparing for a campaign. All right.
Amy, it's tempting to just go over this question because it's a little bit of a dicey question, but I think we should address it, which is the question about whether we have any comments or guidance regarding the issue of donor-centric fundraising versus community-centric fundraising that was made public by the Tom Ahern debacle. We are familiar with that debate and the Tom Ahern debacle. And, like many things, this is my view anyway, I like many things, when we get so polarized, when things get very polarized, there is generally something to be said for both sides that will lead you to a constructive and effective conversation and working relationship in the middle. And that's really what I think about this. I think that there is something to be said for treating your donors really well when they give generously to your organization. And there is something to be said for understanding that the donors don't get to decide what your organization should do. Right? That your organization needs to understand what it does and can and should do by understanding the community it serves. So both of these sides, I think, have value and are valid.
Yeah, let's just back up in case people don't know what we're talking about. So the question is, I don't know if you read it specifically, but do you have any comments or guidance regarding the issue of donor-centric fundraising versus community-centric fundraising? That was, it wasn't made public necessarily by Tom Ahern, but unfortunately that sort of blew it up recently. But basically, donor-centric fundraising has been a concept that's been around for a long time. And that is that the donor is the center of how you should think about and treat your donors well and pay attention to what their wants and needs are, because they're supporting your organization. There's probably a better way to say it than that. And then this idea of community-centric fundraising grew out of, I think, this year's explosion in the media of the diversity, equity, and inclusion issues propelled by the death of George Floyd, and the protests this past summer. And so the idea is that donors who are traditionally primarily white and male in the old guard, shouldn't run the show and I'm not sure that I'm summarizing it well, but the question is, right, is this idea of donor-centric fundraising outdated and racist? Probably. And probably is how many people would describe it. And so the question is, is one side right and one side wrong? And I think, Andrea, what you were alluding to is that probably somewhere in the middle is where we'll land. And I think, I think there are important concepts in both camps, right? And saying even that they're camps means that it's polarizing and one against another. And I'm wondering, I don't know. I think it's a challenging issue and one that we're working through.
Here's my other thought about this, Amy. We have thought a lot and continue to think a lot and explore what we specifically at Capital Campaign Toolkit should be doing about this. That the capital campaign business is the most capitalistic kind of fundraising, right? At its heart, a capital campaign raises money from a very few people who have large amounts of money to give. And guess what? They are often white. They are often, though not always, male. And we do have to think carefully about what those people would like to do that would give them pleasure to give the top 10 gifts of a capital campaign, right? That's the nature of our business. Not so easy to say, well, we're in the capital campaign business, but we're not going to do that anymore, because that's the nature of capital campaigns. So we have been wrestling with that actively. And one of the things that I come to is that our job really is to teach and train and prepare anyone of any age, race, gender. Right, class, gender, to understand how they can. People on one side would say extract wealth. That's the word I've heard. Extract wealth from the people who have it, right? That anyone can build the relationships with the people who have significant money to give, and understanding and knowing, first of all, that you can do that. And that you should do that. And if you're going to have a capital campaign, that's what you will learn to do, is a powerful thing to be teaching everyone. So that's really where I end up when I think about our business. What business are we in the capital campaign business? We are in the business of helping people understand what it is you need to do in order to be most likely that you can raise significant dollars to do what your organization should be doing as developed by the people you serve, right? As shaped by the people you serve. That was pretty articulate, right?
That was articulate, much more articulate than I was. All right. So Emily's sharing in the comments that community-centric fundraising has been in conversation starting as early as 2017 with Vu Le's organization, Nonprofit AF. And, they have lots of articles now they're publishing weekly, I'm sure. So if you're interested in learning more, you can Google both, honestly, donor-centric fundraising and community-centric fundraising, and you will find piles and piles of information if you're interested in going deeper on the topics.
And it's a worthwhile topic. It's a really interesting and important topic. So I encourage you to do that.
Yes, we, as Andrea said, we are thinking about it, working on it, wrestling with it, as I think the folks are at community-centric fundraising too. They're exploring different ways to make fundraising effective and inclusive, and we agree with that. All right. So listen.
Let me go to Gary Bukowski, because it's on track. That question picks up from what we were talking about before, and then let's go to Cheryl. So Gary asks the question: would you agree that learning how to ask questions is an important component in training your boards? I think it is. I think learning how to ask questions is really important, both for trainers and the people we're training. And it turns out that it is a skill, that there is a lot to know about it. Jerry Panis actually wrote a book on it. There have been other books written on how to ask questions. So it is a topic worth considering. At various times in my career, I've turned my attention to that, but I don't know offhand where that material now is. But getting good at asking questions, understanding the difference between closed-ended questions and open-ended questions, practicing asking questions and letting people answer is probably one of the most important skills in fundraising or in any kind of sales. So one more thing about that. So Amy and I have a corporate board member for our business that we speak with him every month. And he told us about his business that they actually have software that they record the training of they record the calls their salespeople are having. And this software measures the amount of time the salespeople talk versus the amount of time the potential customer talks. And he said that invariably the salespeople who talk least sell the most. And the salespeople who talk the most sell the least. And that's true of fundraising too.
Right. It's about listening, right? Listen your way to a gift and listen your way to a sale. And so the better questions you ask, the more successful that you are going to be, because you're asking questions and doing good listening, and you're getting the person across from you to open up and engaged. All right. So 2 things we want to make sure that we do in our next 15 minutes, Andrea. We're going to turn to Cheryl's question, which I'm so excited about because it's about capacity building, a capacity building campaign. And we are doing our capacity campaign webinar next week on Tuesday, April 20th at 1:00. An email went out today with the link to register. And we will send it out again tomorrow morning's blog post announcement. In our newsletter, you will be able to register. So if you're interested in hearing us talk about raising capacity or designing a capacity building campaign to raise $1 million or more, we hope you'll join us. And of course, we hope you'll tell your friends and family to join us for that webinar as well. All right, let's read Cheryl's question. She says, I love your idea of capacity building and would like to start pursuing a campaign in particular for bringing on a program staff member. In terms of developing the campaign budget, what would you suggest in terms of thinking about how many years for supporting a new staffer?
Yeah. So let me address that. You know, the issue here, Cheryl, and you raise this is really the perfect question. The issue is this: you cannot have a campaign to raise money, as you know, for the staffer ad infinitum, right? Ongoing. That's not how campaigns are structured. So what I would suggest is that you pick a number of years, maybe it's 3 years or 5 years even, and you budget in that the salary and benefits and whatever else you want to in declining amounts over those years, whatever the number of years is. And you say, well, during those years, you will be increasing your funding from other sources to pay for it, so that eventually those 2 lines, the decreasing line of the salary and the staff expense and the increasing line of the other ways you're going to be paying for it in your operating budget, cross, right? And that's the sweet spot. So your campaign would raise money for the amount of money that's needed until those 2 lines cross. And of course, you will raise additional money because you will do more services, fee, where people are paying you fees. Maybe you will be able to raise more money through philanthropically. Maybe there are other things you will do to be able to raise more money to cover that cost over time. But what a capacity campaign will do is to let you speed up the process by which you can hire somebody, so that you have some years, whether it's 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. You have to look at those numbers to make sense of them. But that's a typical amount of time that I would think of. Longer than that gets dicey, I think.
Excellent. So, Andrea, also, before we start to wrap up, we're not quite there yet. I do want to give you an opportunity to talk about some mini campaigns, which are coming up.
Yes. And can you tell Krista, Amy, where the session is recorded? Can you put in the that link? I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
And while you do that, I will talk about mini campaigns. So 3 times a year at the Capital Campaign Toolkit, we offer a mini campaign program. It is an 8-week program in which we take the primary factors of a capital campaign and we squeeze them into 8 weeks. We sort of pick out what's really important. We squeeze it into 8 weeks. We take a group of 8 organizations that want to raise $100,000 or more in an 8-week period. And we meet with that group every week for an hour and a half and walk them through the campaign lessons and get them to do the work in the intervening weeks. And lo and behold, by the end of actually the 8 weeks is the program. And then a month later, we have a graduation. So by the end of that 12-week period, just about every one of them ends up raising $100,000 or more, sometimes significantly more. And I have to say that it has turned out to be a terrific program. People learn a huge amount. They learn how to ask. In the session on asking, they bring in a board member or two, so everybody gets a training on asking. They learn how campaigns work. They learn the model of capital campaigns so they can apply it again and again. And it is always just sort of heartwarming. Chuck Harper, are you there? I see you up there. You are one of our current mini campaign folks. You and your wonderful team. It has been such a pleasure to have you. So if you know anyone, or if you are interested in a mini campaign, we are now getting ready to do the next session starting on May 6th. And if you go to Capital Campaign Toolkit, is it /mini campaign with a hyphen?
Well, just go to capitalcampaigntoolkit.com and click on services. And it's at the bottom of that menu of services.
We would love to have you join us. We will have 8 groups who come on, some of them little, some of them big. And I think, among other things, everybody really enjoys the collegiality, getting to know all of the other 8 people. They all learn not only from the material that we present, but they learn from one another in hearing the experiences of each other's groups. And that, I think, is totally fascinating.
Yeah, Andrea, it's funny that you mentioned Chuck, because I saw a question he asked in the chat box before, but it went by so fast that I forgot all about it. So let's go back to Chuck's question. And that's a good reminder for everybody. Use the Q&A box if you have a question, not the chat panel, because those go by so quickly. Chuck's asking, are you an advocate that all board members need to be significant donors? Probably in general and specifically for a campaign. So what would you say to that?
I would say that all donors should be significant donors. All board members should be significant donors if you define significant donors as giving a gift that is significant for them. And that's a big difference, right? From all board members have to be able to give at the top of the giving pyramid, right? That's not likely to happen, nor in most boards these days is it what you want. You want a board that reflects not only the wealthy people in your community, but also the community you serve, which may not be so wealthy. But every board member should be committed enough so they are willing to really give a gift that is for them a stretch gift. For some people, that might be $250, might be $100. For other people, it might be $250,000. So yes, every board member should be committed enough to do something that is really meaningful for them. And that meaningfulness, that willingness to express their commitment financially is powerfully important and powerfully effective. Thanks for asking that question, Chuck.
All right. Gary's sharing the book you were looking for before by Jerry Panis is The Power Questions, or called Power Questions, 337 Essential Questions by Jerry Panis and Andrew Sobel. So if anybody was interested in that, excellent. All right. Good. So, and Marie is asking for the graphic that we were referencing before in terms of what are the 4 steps of fundraising, donor identification, cultivation, solicitation, and stewardship. Because this is a podcast, we like to keep things audio only. So I'm not going to show it, but if anybody wants to email me, I'm happy to share it with you. So you can always email me at amy@capitalcampaigntoolkit.com.
Or honestly, there are many versions of this. And if you Google cycle of fundraising,
yes,
you'll be amazed to see how many different versions come up.
Good. Even better. Excellent. Better. Yes. Right. Okay. All right. Good. All right, let's end on some happiness and words of wisdom and encouragement. So in the chat box, I would like to hear about success stories, any small and large that you've accomplished this week, or anything to help our fellow listeners feel happy and enthusiastic, motivated. Did you get any gifts? Did you talk to any donors? Did you make any meetings or schedule any, donor visits in person or over Zoom? Anything that was wonderful this week, we would love to hear about. Andrea, you were baking this weekend, right?
I was. That was wonderful. Yes. For those of you bakers in the group, last night I made a baba o rum, which, as you can tell, has a lot of rum in it. That was a good thing. It's like a brioche dough soaked in rum. It was totally delicious. That was fun. Jacqueline, 4 donor visits via Zoom. Good for you. That's a lot of donor visits in a week. That's fantastic. Ellen,
a longtime volunteer, turned 80 and informed us that she has included us in her estate planning. Go, Ellen. Excellent. One board member. I was reading Andrea's. One of our board members secured $1 million gift from a lapsed donor for our campaign. Wonderful.
Fantastic. And Laura asked a donor for a multi-year commitment of $50,000 for a new programmatic initiative. She agreed and increased from $2,500 and increased her gift from a $2,500 annual gift. That's quite an increase, Laura. Good for you.
$2,500 to $50,000. Good for Laura. All right. And Jim's having a groundbreaking today and announced our capital campaign to build a new campus for New Hope for Families in Bloomington, Indiana. Good for you, Jim. So much excitement and positive stuff. Rock and roll. Thanks, Ellen. Appreciate it. All right, guys, this is one of the highlights of our week. Honestly, we love seeing you, hearing from you. Do look for our email tomorrow that will be coming to all of you, our weekly email with our newsletter and blog post. The PS will have the link to next week's webinar. You also should have gotten a standalone email today from us at Capital Campaign Toolkit talking about the webinar next week for how to plan for a capacity campaign to raise $1 million or more. So we look forward to having you on that webinar and seeing you every week on these Toolkit Talks. Thanks, everybody.
So thank you all. It's fun to be with you. Amy, it's always fun to tap dance with you. I feel like we're sort of Ginger Rogers and Ginger Rogers or something.
All right. Bye, guys. See you next week. Thanks.
Thanks for joining Amy and Andrea for today's All About Capital Campaigns. To learn more about them and their work together, go to capitalcampaigntoolkit.com.